Horndean is a small village nestled in a rural valley of the Hampshire South Downs. Geography has played a vital role in the shaping of Horndean for the last 200 years. With it, an important location on the road from historic naval city of Portsmouth north to London. Today it is hugged by the constantly busy motorway of the A3M, which was built here to bypass the A3 that runs directly through the historic centre of the village. A crossroads that was home to the first pub and then brewery that shaped life for Horndean and its villagers for over 150 years. For Horndean was home for the famous Gale and Co. Farming in this area of the South Downs goes back many generations. The farms of the 1700s in this area would employ local people, and the farmer's wife would often brew ale to be sold to these labourers working the land. Pubs or inns in this time would often be farms. The original Ship and Bell back in the early 1700s was located by the village crossroads and was seemingly noted for its fine ales, brewed with the clean water drawn from the chalk downs from a well conveniently located under the original bar. So good were these ales that competing farms workers would visit the Ship and Bell, and as such the farmers would buy in these ales instead of producing their own. A very early success. Born in 1802, local baker and shopkeeper Richard Gale had a keen eye for new business opportunities, such as becoming a coal and corn merchant. In 1847, his small Horndean business empire expanded dramatically with the purchase of the Ship and Bell, with Henry, who was one of his 4 sons. At this time, it was the largest pub in the village and had its own brewery over the road. And with a changing taste for more mild beers that required less capital for production, it saw small breweries experience dramatic growth in this period. Within just a few years after the purchase, Richard Gale's was expanding again by becoming a wine and spirits merchant. The brewery had also expanded and increased production. This quickly became a bigger family business, with the return of youngest son, then aged 24, George Alexander Gale, from Portsmouth to Horndean in 1853, to become the landlord of the Ship and Bell. With Horndean being between the capital and Portsmouth, it was a stopping point for coach journeys, often the last rest or change of horses before heading south to the south coast. The village was also becoming popular with naval officers based in Portsmouth as a desirable place to live. By the 1860s, Gales had increased in staff and invested in the latest in brewery technology, a steam engine. The influence of the Industrial Revolution was making its way into rural life, and in all areas of production by this time. Times were good, and the family moved to the new popular seaside community of Southsea in Portsmouth. But disaster struck at the end of the 1860s with a fire that destroyed much of the Gales brewery. A mix of wooden structures and the use of fires for heat needed in the brewing process meant that only the flint buildings survived the inferno, and these still stand today. With a Victorian zeal for construction, a new brewery and tower were built on the east side of the road next to the Ship and Bell. Construction was completed in 1869. Despite being new, this brewery had deep roots with the original Ship and Bell, with it now being part of the new building's fabric, with the well inside and the actual pub room becoming the sample cellar. It wasn't just the business side of Richard Gale's life that saw some tragedy. He sadly lost 3 of his 4 sons to illness over the years. Despite being the youngest, George Alexander Gale had taken on the mantle of the business and made his mark. His own family was struck with the tragedy of loss, and as such it was maybe this that drove him to immerse himself in his work at this very busy time. On the 26th of April 1887 saw the trademarking of the Horndean Golden Tonic Pale Ale. Swiftly after, in 1888, George Gale and Co was registered as an incorporated company. Valued at £100,000, the business included 18 tied public houses, 4 off licences, 18 brewery cottages, and of course the brewery itself. Gales had business from Southampton through to Chichester and the Isle of Wight. The business also continued its track record of utilising the latest technology with the installation of electricity in the mid-1890s. The 10th of August 1896 saw a new family come into the picture, with Herbert Frederick Bowyer and his business associates buying the major shareholding in the business for £97,240 from George Gale. With Herbert coming in from Guildford as the new chairman, the Bowyer family settled into Horndean at Westfield, and a new chapter began. In the latter years of the 1800s and the start of the 19th century, the brewing industry was going through some significant changes. Beer consumption began to fall for the first time, in no small part to social changes of the time. New attractions like organised sport, music hall, and travel by train began to change people's interests. This was also the dawn of mass production, seeing costs fall for consumables such as clothing and food. Beer consumption would continue to fall all the way through to the Second World War. It would seem these factors may have been in part the motivation for Herbert Frederick Bowyer to sell Gales to Portsmouth competitors Brickwood's Brewery only 4 months after the purchase. When all the talk of sale or amalgamation fell through, it appears the new chairman put all of his energy into making Gales a huge success through some significant changes as the 19th century began. The first change was to dramatically increase employees' wages and reduce the dividends and directors' fees, shifting the financial benefits of success away from the top of the organisation. This could well have helped the huge increase in output of Gales in this period, growing to 18,000 barrels by 1914, an increase of 73%. Bottled beer also grew by an astonishing 1,000%, with it becoming 25% of output by 1914. The rest of the industry didn't match that until 1939. As well as investing in the staff of Gales, there was also a huge investment in new technology to help increase productivity. This wasn't just on the production floor, but included telephones and typewriters, as well as transport, utilising traction engines, steam wagons, and then petrol lorries by 1908. These complemented the traditional horse-drawn drays that were still in use for many years to come. Beyond investment in the business, Gales also looked to expand through purchasing other local breweries including Homewell in Havant and Square Brewery in neighbouring Petersfield. All these changes put Gales in good stead at the arrival of an event that would turn everything upside down, the Great War.
From the village and the people in the village point of view is that you've got that sense of there's the tower. You know, from pretty much every angle you go into Horndean, you can see the tower of the brewery. A working place. There's an industry there. There's an iconic industry there, and it's all senses. You know, if you live in Horndean, you know, at certain points of the day, it would smell of the brewery. Gales was quite an interesting brewery. Breweries of that age, they get kind of cobbled together. And even though they don't necessarily look it, it's a bit gets added on here and a bit gets added on there. So you walked into the front yard of the brewery, as we called it, and the well was at your left hand side. And everybody has this image that there's the sort of thing with a bucket on it, but it's not like that. It's just a big hole basically with a pipe going right down into the chalk. A good solid 50% of the water that was used in Gales was well water. You couldn't quite use as much as we wanted, but pretty much all the brewing liquor came from the well.
And they had a big deep well there they did, where they used to pump the water out to do the brewing. Hell of a depth it was, you know. Because I remember one of the blokes went down there because the little towel to tell you how much water was in it, it got stuck, and the bloke went down the well on the ladders and they was quite rusty, and he said, "I'll never go down there again."
went into the brewery tower, and the mash tun was probably one of the oldest pieces of equipment in the brewery, dating back to the 20s. So cast iron, brass plates at the bottom, copper lid. And then from there we flowed through to the process floor. Now that was put in the 80s. The process floor got put in, and so we had a very large copper and whirlpool. Now whirlpool separates out the hops. And then transferred down to the fermentation room. Now this is again a classic bit of history where we had majority of open kauri pine vessels, and it was a time when perhaps, in better marketing, we should have really been shouting from the rooftops that our beer was brewed in wood, or majority of our beer was brewed in wood, because there were a couple little copper vessels as well. And we did have a couple of stainless vessels in another room in the brewery, another fermenting room. But the majority of the beer was brewed in hand-clean wooden vessels, which sounds shocking, but these are pieces of history. Apparently they were imported from New Zealand not long before the kauri pine became a protected species. So it was very much a case that we wouldn't be able to replace them with the same wood, and they were pretty impressive things, and quite intriguing, I think. And for us it was day to day. We didn't really kind of make as much fuss of the fact that these are something utterly special. From there the beer just transferred to, we had quite a bit of tankage out the back of the brewery, and we had probably about a couple of weeks worth of storage capacity, almost 3 weeks worth of storage capacity outside the brewery, so we could almost brew it and take a week off. And there were occasions on refurbing, and in January we'd be doing things where we'd take a week off brewing and we'd have enough beer there. Very handy at Christmas when you've got stock in tank. And transfer down to cask, and really as simple as that. One of the things that we had, because we had a corked bottling line, and we did cork bottled beer, and at that point we were the only brewery in the UK really doing that. I mean, when we first arrived, we were one of the few breweries even just producing bottle conditioned beer, so live beer in the bottle. I mean, that was a dying art by then.
Well, they used to wash all the bottles, used to put them in there, and then from there they used to dry them all out, and then from there they used to fill up the bottles. And then after that, they stacked them all in the cases, ready to be taken out.
And so the brewery had some modern bits, but some really fantastic old bits to it. It really felt like you had proper history right there at your fingertips. I mean, we got new bottling plant put in, we got a new boiler put in, we got a new cask washer. We built new racking plant. There were things needed though. There's certainly things needed, and one of the difficulties you have in a brewery like that is that you got an old site. You've got to try and crowbar it into existing areas. With what we had, the old-fashioned, it wouldn't necessarily been a negative thing, because it might have involved a lot more exporting of beer, to the US specifically, and potentially into Europe. But it would have been one of the ways that things may have changed.
Like many breweries, Gale's saw a steep decline in sales during the First World War, up to 37%. What kept things going for Gale's were the skills and the innovation of head brewer Sidney Steele. This pain continued post-war with a hike in duty and falling sales, with a backdrop of accelerating social change and national economic strain. Despite this, in 1926, Gale's continued investment meant an update to the Victorian brewhouse, with it now equipped with a new mash tun. By 1939, the brewery also featured a new bottling plant, a modern transport fleet, and an updating and expansion in the brewery's pubs. Once again, Gale's was also bucking the trend in the industry by continuing to grow, with production growing 41% in the years between the wars. 1938 saw the passing of Chairman Herbert Frederick Bowyer, who had steered the Gale ship through some of its most difficult years, with the company growing from strength to strength. As the skies darkened at the start of the Second World War, a new chairman stepped in, F. Hugh Bowyer, the son of Herbert Frederick Bowyer. During the war years, pubs once again became community hubs, with many other activities curtailed. At this time also F. Hugh Bowyer rejoined the RAF to fight in the war. The bombing of southern England during the Blitz impacted Gale's, with many pubs hit by bombs and heavily damaged. The years after the end of World War II were difficult for Gale's. Broadly, for the first time, the brewery felt the same impact as the rest of the brewing industry, with output falling dramatically to 15,000 barrels in 1949, then falling to 11,000 barrels by 1959. A huge, almost 50% fall from past years. These were worrying times for smaller breweries, with the industry rife with mergers and takeovers. And Gale's had another takeover attempt, this time by Portsmouth and Brighton United Breweries. Once again, though, the sale fell through. At this time, with sales falling, a seemingly absent management and doubts over quality control, it was a good time for a new head brewer to come in and give direction. In 1954, Edward Argyll took over the role, and Gale's turned a corner. New award-winning ales were created in this period, including Gale's famous HSB. Growth in sales began again, in part due to population boom, emergence of youth culture, and rise in consumption in restaurants. The mid-1960s saw continued investment in the brewing facilities at Horndean, as production grew and tastes changed. Keg bitter was introduced in 1962, and in 1964 a microbiology laboratory was added. In 1972, Gale's was also one of the first to install their own pure yeast propagation plant. This constant thread of investment saw dividends in the control of the quality of production that would then translate into sales and profitability. By 1974, output was back to 20,000 barrels and growing fast. The 1980s saw dramatic upheaval at Gale's. After many years of service, head brewer Ted Argyll would retire in 1981. His innovation in production had shaped the past decades. Derek Lowe would step in as the head brewer. 1981 also saw a new chairman with Noel Chambers. F. Hugh Bowyer's long term in charge through some of the company's biggest difficulties and highest highs saw the handover with Gale's at good levels of production and profit seemingly poised for new levels of success. The early 80s also saw big changes at the historic Horndean production site. Pressure was building on production due to the very limited space, and the only way to expand was upwards. In 1984, a new process floor was added at the cost of £600,000. It included a Whirlpool hop separator, hot liquor tanks, liquid sugar tanks, a power flow heat exchanger, and 3 stainless steel fermenting vessels. The new facility offered an increase of 40% in capacity, with production falling in the industry and breweries closing, Gale continued to choose investment to lead the way. Despite the backdrop of difficult economic times, the 80s saw huge growth, spearheaded by HSB. Traditional draft beers rose by 225% to 39,000 barrels, and HSB alone at 20,000 barrels in 1984. As always, tastes would continue to change, and as the 1980s became the 1990s, this would impact Gale's more than ever before. 1987 saw another change at the top, with Chairman R. George Bowyer returning the Bowyer family name to the top job. Noel Chambers retired in 1987 due to ill health after 38 years of service at Gale's.
Gale's was special, I would say, for a number of reasons. Proper traditional beers that had a consistent flavour and a decent quality and a good following. Our brand's well liked, well recognised. We had a very distinctive style. Gale's beers were significantly sweeter than definitely most South Coast beers, and we had what I always describe as a mild and easy drinking style, which is one of the reasons that everybody thought HSB was a dangerously drinkable beer. I mean, these days 4.8 doesn't sound like a strong beer, but I think what its drinkability is what made it dangerously drinkable beer. As regards to the recipes, I mean, HSB, in terms of things, when you think about it, it was developed in the 50s. We also had our best bitter and the BBB, as we used to call it, but it was Butzer was its proper kind of marketed name, as it were. And then Gale's Best got kind of moved to one side, and we brought out. Now I'm trying to think. I've got to get this in the right order. First we had IPA. It never quite grabbed the public. We then moved on to GB, which had this huge, enormous pump clip with a lion on it. And then there was a kind of mix and match moment where we realised that this brand wasn't, and eventually we had a beer, it was just called Gale's. So it was Gale's Best, but it was Gale's. It really ticked the boxes for what we were looking for, a really drinkable, hoppy beer. But not taken away from the fact that HSB was very much our biggest seller. Over 50% of what went out the brewery, probably as much as 60 at sometimes, was HSB. To the point that on a Friday when the shop floor guys came in to start what was the grind, so they grind them all before sending over to the grist case. They wouldn't know what we were brewing on a Monday morning, so you just said, 100 barrels of HSB. You wouldn't even know if that was what if that was the but you couldn't do any wrong if you just said, we'll just say we're doing that. I'll mention to whatever brewer is writing up the brewing schedule for next week, that's already been decided. Gale's technically was, in my mind, a brewer of mild ale. So the beer was relatively sweet and easy drinking, and by that rationale, your customers and your pubs get used to that style of beer. So HSB, you think, well, that's not a mild, because a mild's 3%. Well, it's a strong mild. In fact, we did brew a multi-award-winning strong mild, festival mild. So I thought, well, we don't want to brew a 3% thing. We've already got a keg and a cask version, so we brew something special. We'll brew a mild. People like our mild, so we'll brew that. And that kind of dates back to war years. Gale's were predominantly brewing mild. Now, that might have been a little bit down to how things were immediately during the Second World War and immediately after. But that characteristic flavour, that softness, that sweet flavour, really was the signature of our beers. The Millennium beer, and there was a Golden Century beer that we did, I think, for the Queen Mother's 100th birthday. They were really, really good. We did another one, a 7.1 beer for Camera's, was it 25th? Yeah, I think it was 25th anniversary, and we did a bottle version that was absolutely stunning, and the cask version was just insanely good. Still to this day, one of the finest beers I've ever tasted. There was always a little bit of tinkering, and there has to be. One season's malt is different from another season's malt. Availability of a certain quality of hops Even the water, you can get variations in the water. You think the well's constant, but sometimes it isn't. As brewers, we didn't really have the, not necessarily capacity, but we didn't necessarily have the want or capacity to do vast amounts of experimentation. We really were sticking with the tried and tested malts we used, the tried and tested hops we used, and even when we produced something new, it's much more about altering our hop balance, but not necessarily going too far out on a limb. Sometimes I felt a little frustrated in that. Oh, we could go and get this, or we could go and get that. But there's something to be said for not scaring your traditional drinkers that drink your beer anyway. So even when you do bring out a new beer, don't go too radically far from it. We always certainly aim to try and win more awards. That's one of the things that you know. I know there was a lot of. I'm pretty sure it was on my boss's appraisal every year. You have to have won at least X amount of certificates to add to the wall. But that was very much about getting the beers into competitions, and certainly, I mean, some of the beers that we produced, were highly underrated. I mean, everybody would know about HSB because it was our main brand. But we produced a few beers that people that I would say, oh yeah, this is a national standard, a very highly national acclaimed standard. And towards the end of my time at Gale's, we were producing both. The final Gale's Best was an absolutely stunning beer, and it was a change in our style because we were starting to brew a hoppier beer, but keeping that sweetness and that balance in there. After several years of trying different secondary brands, we finally got it before the brewery closed. So yeah, that was important, and we really saw that was something that we would focus the future of the brewery on. I think we did a few lighter coloured strong beers. The Trafalgar one we did was absolutely wonderful, really nice beer, and slightly annoyingly that was sort of 2005. That was October 2005, about the time the Takeover did huge amount of these bottled Trafalgar 200 beers. We'd certainly made 2 D-Day ones in the time that I was there, 94 and 2004. We had D-Day 50 and D-Day 60, and that's a lovely label on it with Monty and Eisenhower, and it's I actually think it's quite one of the loveliest labels design-wise that they had. And a lot of the time that it would be a relabeled prize old ale, and sort of specially labelled prize ale, or other times it would be a brew of its own volition. All those sort of 7, 8, 10, 11% things, they were all brewed in our old copper, so they were actually brewed slightly differently than the standard cask beers. So we had the old copper at the top of the tower, and it was great. It very much hand sort of brewing, so you're opening the steam valves by hand, desperately trying not to get burnt on things as you're checking things up, and a big old valve on the bottom to open up. It was really fun. And the last beer was brewed in that. We did a beer called Last Drop, which, let me get around, I'm trying to remember, I've still got bottles of it at home that I drink every so often. And we brewed that on March 16th in 2006. I think it ended up about 11%. There's a mistake on the label, it says 9%, but it's 11%. But it was never available for commercial sales, so that's fine. I'm probably more a brewer because I love pubs as much as anything else. I love beer and I love pubs, so that makes me enthusiastic about being a brewer. But I also kind of like the fact that the pubs really had a feel to them. They weren't quite as, there are breweries with extremely traditional pubs, but Gale's had the ability to at least still have the very traditional combined with sort of bigger, more kind of top-end pubs as well at the same time. And I certainly thought that the range and style of pubs, was really interesting. There was always something interesting, whether it's a little backstreet boozer or whether it's a big plush pub like the Still and West or the Ship, or even something as absolutely wonderful as Wickham Arms in Winchester. But they certainly had a nice range of interesting pubs, and that kind of made me quite proud as well.
The 1990s saw a dramatic swing away from traditional ales, with the lager now 50% of all beer consumed. Despite this, it was decided not to install lager production facilities at Horndean, but to instead increase both the range offered by Gale's and the other brands offered within Gale's pubs, such as Guinness and Carling. By 1992, these quickly became 50% of all sales. 1991 had many changes in store for management, one of which was the appointment of Nigel Atkinson becoming managing director. Soon after, in 1993, saw another major moment in the history of Gale's, with Richard E. Gale retiring after 32 years of service, thus ending the Gale family involvement in the company after 146 years. Richard was great-grandson of Richard Rogers Gale, nephew of George Gale. Production investment was needed to stop the sales of other brands overtaking Gale's own products, so once again, investment in production facilities was used to drive growth. The early 90s also saw the hugely popular HSB now available in cans, and the introduction of Gale's Best Bitter. This cask-conditioned bitter would soon become second only to HSB. In 1996, Gale also added the popular Gale's IPA. More awards will continue to show the exceptional work of Derek Lowe and his team. This decade also saw growth in the public houses owned by Gale's. The recession in the early 1990s helped in the procurement of 20 pubs on the Isle of Wight and freeholds from Whitbread in 1995. By 1997, Gale's had 120 public houses. Innovation and investment also continued in other areas of the business, with the introduction and updating of computers. All of this no doubt helped to make Gale's Hampshire Company of the Year in 1994. 1997 saw the 150th anniversary of George Gale and Co Limited, marking an incredible milestone for the business. Throughout those years, it had constantly shown how much it valued its staff, many of whom still lived locally and were generations working within the business, and how teamwork, innovation, and investment in quality continued to drive growth and success.
Well, when I first came to Horndean in 1948, I was at school there, and it was just a local little village then, loads of shops and everything like that, and the road was all different, and just built up from there. Everything's all different today. When we come in Horndean, the first thing you can see is the tower, with Gale's name around the side of it. Because every Christmas we used to have a big Christmas tree on the top, and that was quite good. You could see that for miles away, night time when it was dark, lit up.
When I came for my interview, it's dark at night. I didn't drive at the time. I took the coach down, stayed overnight in the Ship and Bell prior to my interview. So it's very much a case of, and obviously it being November or whenever, it was dark when I arrived, and it was when I got up in the morning, I went, wow, this village is just entirely Gale's, and that immediately made me quite pleased. I liked that feeling that this kind of dominates this little village here. There are a few other breweries like that in the UK. Certainly at the time there were, the likes of Adnams in Southwold, even that's more of a town, or Bateman's up in Lincolnshire, and Hook Norton. All these breweries sort of sit in their surroundings, and I really thought that was good. I really enjoyed it. I thought that was a good thing.
Good little, everyone got together sort of thing, the brewery and the people in the village and all, because that was the only sort of employee ran that way in them days, Yeah, that's right, it was all big families in the brewery, especially the Longhursts. They was a big family, they were, all the sons and daughters all worked there, Purnells and all that. They was all employed at the brewery, Everyone knew one another, Well, it was all just local people, They used to live in brewery cottages and all that,
We didn't have much flow through of staff. People came, they stayed. I thought Gale's was a lovely company to work for. We had quite a nice tight-knit team in the production department. we would go for a drink on Fridays. Lots of the shop floor staff would go in and have a beer, and everybody would be treated as equal at Friday lunchtime, and or you could generally have a drink with somebody at the end, close of play at work as well. So that was always good. If a shop floor guy's in and he's drinking the beer, it shows he cares. It shows he's in, he's having a beer at the end of the day, at lunchtime on Friday, or even, if they pop into the sampling cellar for a quick half of beer at the end of the day. And, I used to deliberately go down there at those sort of times, to bump into people, because you got, if they were having a quick half, they would maybe tell you some stuff that might be important. Oh, I forgot to mention that pump's playing up again, or such and such, and said, well, you've mentioned to one of the engineers, and said, well, I guess we'll wait here long enough, one will be in a minute. So you'd sit in the sample cell, and an engineer would turn up, and, they'd mouth off at each other about how the pump wasn't fixed properly, but it would probably get fixed anyway. So, these things would happen in a more lubricated fashion.
Yeah, my father, he worked in there. I can't remember when he started, but he'd done 25 years there. He first worked in the bottling store when he first went there, but then after a while, he got a job as a stoker, shoveling all the coal on the fire and that, wheeling it across the road in a wheelbarrow and chuck it on the boiler. And then after a few years, they got onto oil. They got Brickwoods was finishing, so they bought the boiler off of them, and that was gas and oil, and it done the job then, it did, They had to take the wall down to get it through the wall in the side of the brewery. So every time they had to do that, they had to close the main road off for a few hours to get the boiler in with a crane and all that, I was about 12, 13. When he used to have to sweep the flues out, I used to go down through underneath the bottom in a little hole with all of us and shovel all the soot up and bring it out and put it on the lorry he did, I used to go down and help him sweep it up. I was only small, it was only a little tiny hole to get through, But when I first started there, all the old boys used to have a gallon of beer every day in a stone jar, and that was their supply every day of the working day of the brewery, But I didn't bother because I never drunk. I was teetotal. When I first started at Gale's, I didn't drive the first day because I went out with an old retired fella. Well, he was nearly retired, and he took me out. But the second day from there on, I drove every day of the year. We had quite a big area. We had 150 pubs we used to deliver to, and about 1,000 outlets, clubs and all this and that. As a delivery driver, I used to go around Reading. We used to go Reading, Brighton, Isle of Wight. When we used to deliver to Lasham Gliding Club, me and my mate used to take our sandwiches for a dinner break, watch all the gliders coming in and that. I got on all right with it. We used to have a dropping bag to drop them off the lorry onto the Grange. Sometimes you might get one to leak, but you got to get a hammer and knock it stays down, the bands down to stop it from leaking. Dropping bags all full of corks. Yeah, there's about 3 foot square they were. Where before we used to have a place they used to chuck all the bottles, and we used to have to keep going around getting the corks, but then towards the end they used to buy them all ready made for us, Well, like before, we used to have a double rope, to let the barrels down, but like to the latter part of the time with the metal ones, you just had one single rope with a hook in it. You could let it straight down the cellar, When we first started, they used to have a little 4.5. They used to call that a pin. And then the 9's next size up, and then the 18 gallons are keels, and the 36s are barrels. And then we used to sometimes have hogsheads. They were 72 gallons, but we never used to take them out. Yeah, we used to have a cooper and all, They used to mend the barrels when they leaked, But then after a while we went on to aluminium, aluminium barrels, and it wasn't so bad them days, it goes more lighter.
I used to work at the brewery. I'd done all the bottling and the stacking and that sort of thing. And then from there I went done all the cleaning for all the offices. So I was there 12 years doing that sort of thing, yeah. I quite liked it actually. Yeah, I used to get up early. I still get up early now. And then Christmas time we used to all get together and we used to have like Father Christmas and they used to dish out all the presents for the kids, didn't they? Yeah, it was a family affair. You know, it was quite interesting really. Yeah. So that's why I sort of stayed there. Yeah, it was nice, I enjoyed it, you know, we all had a good laugh and it was nice, I thought, you know.
The strange thing was, I mean, it does show what an old-fashioned company they were. I mean, there's no getting away from it. A lot of these companies were quite. I employed a lab technician that had a beard, and that was deemed as. I went to see my boss and said, "Oh, I've decided to employ that fella there," and my boss, "He's got a beard." And he was with the trade manager, who looked around, equally shocked that I'd employed somebody with a beard. And I didn't know what to say to them apart from look at my watch and go, "Oh, look, it's 1956." Of course, it wasn't an issue, but strangely enough, there were plenty of people with beards, but somehow this was deemed as strange. But there we go. But anyway, at that point in time, Moira was one of the few. Female brewers in the UK, yeah, and she was pretty well known in the industry because she was heavily involved in the Brewers Guild and things like that. So but as I recall, and this is what my ex-boss Derek had told me that, and I don't know if he ever told Moira this. I guess he did. That when he was interviewing her, there was a little bit of reticence regards having a woman in the brewery, from the upper management saying, kind of, and which is extremely strange when you think about it. It was a strange situation that it didn't occur to me because there were plenty of female graduates when I was at university doing brewing, so it didn't seem any different.
With the beginning of a new millennium, Gales was weathering the constant change of the brewing industry well, with increased profits and production. The sale of the business had been broached many times over the history of Gales, right back to when Herbert Frederick Burr bought a major shareholding. Over the years, there were many offers to take over or merge, but time and again they fell through for a multitude of different reasons. In late 2005, out of the blue to most employees, it was announced that George Gale and Co Limited had been bought by Fuller, Smith and Turner from London for almost £92 million.
I actually thought, as we were leading up to that, I really felt like Gales was really starting to hit a stride. There were times before I thought, God, the company's ticking along okay. A year or two before we brought out the new best, as it were, the Gales best, and we won a couple of awards that year for it. And I thought, actually, this is not too bad. We're ticking along here. A few extra things here or there, and things are good. The takeover did come as a surprise. There's no question about that. That was just jaw-dropping, shocking. If I've been asked several times, and brewery tours we've talked about this. People go, "Oh, you must have known it was kind of on this." Not a clue. Not 10, maybe sort of 8 or 9 years before, it might have been a case of, oh right, this is an issue. Vividly, I vividly remember that day. We were bottling, and I really despised bottling, so I wasn't in a good mood. I was setting up the bottler. The bottler was running well, which was a surprise. So I was thinking, good, we are going to get this done pretty much by mid-morning, and already sort of planning an extensive lunch. My boss, Derek, came to me and very poker face said, "Oh, there's a very important meeting up in the hop store." That was the meeting room at Gales. And got to get all your staff. I got all my staff round up. It's that strange thing about that is that when you're doing something like that, you've got, what's this about? And I thought, gosh, I hope it's not somebody's died or something like that or whatever, or, and it didn't really initially occur to me that was what it was. I then rounded up my staff and we went up to the hop store. Everybody sort of pouring in from across the road. The accounts departments and things were all across the road. Yeah, I opened the door and I looked up and saw Anthony Fuller and Richard Turner. And, you know, I know exactly who those two people are. You know, that's the chairman and the managing director of Fuller's. And they're sat on this table at the front and there's a big overhead saying Fuller's. And my heart sank. I knew before a word had been said what had happened. There's a kind of pretense of, oh, this isn't a takeover. This is a merger. And it's that awful kind of, I don't want to be spun at. Am I going to have a job? Are you keeping the brewery open? And of course, nobody answered that question.
Initially, Fuller's did not outline the future of the business, but there was immediate concern in Horndean. The rising costs of doing business and red tape, combined with the buying clout of larger rivals, were stated as the reasons for the inevitable sale of Gale's.
Of course, they know that to recoup income, they have to sell the site. They know that's happening. Just when, you know, the writing's on the wall. It must have been a difficult time for my boss to keep us all G'd up. When emotionally it's tough for him as well. But yeah, pretty emotional.
The campaign for real ale also called for the continued production of Gale's at Horndean. But on the 27th of February 2006, people's worst fears were realised, with the announcement of closure at the end of March.
It's a shame really for it to go, because it's been there 150 odd years, isn't it? Well, I suppose everyone was upset, weren't they, you know? Because when I worked there, you know, it was like a good job, you know, I liked it. They can't keep on brewing if they didn't want the brewery, would they? You know?
Well, I was a bit shocked actually, because I thought someone else would have took it over, you know, but being no one did, so, you know, you just had to lose it. I wish someone did take it, because it would have been ideal, really. It would have still carried on, but no one wanted to do it, so that's why I had to go.
Production of Gale's most popular ales would be moved to Fuller's in London, including Butser, Festival Mild, Prize Old Ale, and of course HSB. Distribution and warehousing would continue on the edge of Horndean near the A3M, but the doors closed in March for the very last time. Lives for many of the employees of Gale's were obviously changed dramatically after the unexpected closure of such a large and influential employer in the village of Horndean. For most, they would leave the brewing industry, but for some, they would find a new way to move forward.
I was eventually told the brewery would close. I was actually up in a friend's brewery in Edinburgh. Brewery closes at the end of March, and that, you know, it was pretty much the date we all knew. I mean, thankfully, it sounds daft, but thankfully it was November, December, so there was beer to brew. You know, there's things to do. We were busy because there was a lot of things, and there's a lot of things happening. So it kind of, even though some of it was about the takeover, it kind of took your mind off of it a little bit. On the very last day, there was a substantial breakfast got cooked around the brewery. People started drinking about 9ish. People were in the pub about 11ish. Certainly most of the production department were in the pub at about 11. But it got to about 11:30, and I thought, oh, nobody's in the brewery. I'm going to have one last proper walk round, you know, really look at everything, do the sort of route, you know, touch things. That sounds weird, but you know what I mean. You know, quietly say bye to bits of equipment that I've used, and and that was kind of weird. Is that I assumed when I walked out of there that was that. I would never walk over the threshold of the brewery again, but I have. When I set up this place, there's a few things that I needed. I decided I was looking for some specific piece of equipment. I spoke to an engineer from Gale's, ex-engineer, who was one of the guys tore the place apart with the scrap people. And I said, "Oh, have you got one of those boxes for electrical box for the outside of the wall and said, oh, I know whether you can get one for free. Said there's one still on the wall in the bottling hall in Gales. I went, well, I can't get that because I've got no access to there. But I got access to go in and get some stuff. What's most shocking about that was I went over the threshold, and a year and a half afterwards, after lots of the place had been torn apart, he let me in. He said, oh, by the way, there's no lights, there's no nothing, so you've got torches, and I'll have to go round with you because there's huge bits of flooring missing and things. But we knew the place so well that we knew where things would be. One of the things that is and still shocks me, that the tanks and things weren't necessarily sold on. Sometimes breweries, they sell on complete, but that didn't necessarily happen. I don't know the whole story, but I'm guessing that there was some pressure to get the site cleared. So they took away lots of the metal, didn't clear the site. So the place was an absolute tip. We picked out a few things, and the more I saw, there were lots of things I scavenged from the place. That cabinet was from the sample cellar in Gales. It sounds silly, but it's there are actually quite nice connections to places that to my old company. The cabinet more than anything else. I was appalled to see that still on the wall in the sample cellar. So that was bespoke made for the sample cellar in Gales, and it sits on the wall in my place, so it means a lot to me. And one of the things we wanted were big spanners. So these what they called RJT spanners. So you got like inch and a half, 2 inch, 3 inch spanners for all the bits and pieces around the brewery. But of course they're metal, so they just get skipped like the rest of things. Except in Gale's days, guys used to hide spanners because the theory was that, they didn't have a set of spanners each, but they'd hide them so they had one when they needed it. And so there were little hidey holes around the brewery that we knew of, and I had this lovely sort of feeling of going, right, think like the person that does this, and where of it, and you kind of look around, and down here, oh, there's a spanner, and it's hidden away. So yeah, we found about 5 or 6 hidden spanners. It kind of made us slightly gleeful, and we would have sort of memory of the person as we were actually finding the spanner that they hid. And the strange thing is about going into your office. I had 2 offices, my upstairs office and my downstairs office next to the cellar. The diary sat open at the page where I left it. There's strange things like, one of the weirdest things was in the fermenting room, the glass hydrometer, so you've got really delicate hydrometers sitting in a little jar. And bearing in mind the whole place is being torn apart, there's beams and things out and things that, and yet this jar full of these really delicate hydrometers are still sat there. And that pleased me on both levels. Firstly, you think these have sat there, still in this. But secondly, they're like worth £65 each. So immediately I went, I'll have, there's 6 hydrometers there. So I'll have those. So it's, and at least they've got a home, Irving and Company Brewers has been going for 13 and a half years now. It's still fine. It still sounds shocking for it to be that long, but 13 and a half years. We're very much a traditional cask brewery. We have 5 running beers: Frigate, Invincible, Type 42, Admiral Stout, and our multi-award winning Iron Duke IPA. I guess we're a pretty small brewery and very locally based, I guess. Nothing goes much more than about 30 minutes drive from the brewery. Still very much about cask beer, about keeping things very simple. So there's an element of traditionality, but I like to think I'm a little bit more, how can we say, adventurous in the beers than Gales were. But in the same way, the core of my brands is still quite sweet beer. So it is quite a lot of it's about. I don't perceive us getting massively bigger. I'm kind of happy as we are at the moment. If we get out of the pandemic, okay. But yeah, we're quite a happy brewer, basically.
With the closure of Gales now complete, the initial clearance of the site in Horndean was quite quick. The different floors of the production facility were cleared for scrap, and sadly elements of the business's history were lost in the stripping of items of value. Horndean is, as it always was, a beautiful village and an attractive location for people to make their home. So it was not a surprise that the site was earmarked for redevelopment into houses. Despite initial plans in place, the impact of the global crash of 2008 put the future of the site in question. As areas of the site were cleared, it was only the famous landmark tower that would remain. But now, a hollow shell. By the mid-2010s, the bulldozers and teams of builders had taken over the site, with new houses and apartments, shops and more. Scattered amongst these new streets of homes, named after different elements of the original brewery, were some historic buildings that had survived. The tower itself is still an imposing sight overlooking the village, and keeps its name, Gale's, on the roof. The tower also retains some of the aspects of the original brewery for those with a keen eye. For the many new families now calling Horndean their home, there would soon be a more visual link with the history of Gale's on the old building.
When new developments happen, how do you keep the memory of that alive? What stories can you tell about the buildings? And particularly where buildings are adapted. The Gale's Brewery is really probably the start of Horndean's identity in terms of some of the housing that would have grown up around that, and the communities that would have grown up around it. And I think it was about marking it. I was invited by East Hampshire District Council, specifically Rebecca Probert, to commission some public art on the side of the former building. But there was also some interest to involve the Horndean community in workshops in some way, which was where making spaces work really kind of came into the fore. You can't just commission a piece of public art to go on the side of a building without the public being involved in why is it there, what's it for. And then the final artist that we selected, Mel Holmes, who's based in Sheffield. He was selected to respond to the brief and to come up with 3 initial outline drawings. The idea being that he would then be invited to the parish fair in Horndean, and then the public could vote. So that was really exciting. It was the parish fair event was really interesting. Alongside the commission and Mel turning up with his 3 drawings, we commissioned 3 engagement artists to work on that. So that was Peter Levy, who was ceramics, Rachel Alexander, who's a painter based in Winchester, and Michael O'Leary, who's a storyteller based in Southampton. And between the 3 of them, they got involved in engaging communities in and around Horndean. That included working with adults with learning disabilities, a drop-in group, people with mental health needs, children, young people from local schools and colleges and the general community, and also with the summer scheme for children. Peter Levy worked with the Gale's Brewery bottle, which we felt was kind of quite an iconic shape. He took 2 approaches. One was to use the Gale's bottle where it was bisque fired and work with glazes, so people had lots of fun customising their Gale's bottle. And the other one was that he made the Gale's bottles but didn't fire them. He got them to the stage of being leather hard. But what that meant was he brought lots of tools along so that people could cut into the bottles, cut them in half, cut holes in, customise them in terms of shape. And then those were just dipped in glaze and fired. Rachel Alexander, she looked at the labels. So she was looking at old photographs and kind of showing groups how they could make them vintage, look quite vintage, and she also brought along a lot of Gale's labels and mats, beer mats, all those kind of things. And then we had Michael O'Leary, who did storytelling not only at the parish fair, but he also went to the local library, and that was lovely. So he was unpacking things like bottle top lids for children to kind of delve into little objects, and they could make up little stories, so that the community were just really interested, not only just in the Gales and the history of Gales, but in working together and being creative and doing something that could kind of connected them to each other. And I think it was an opportunity to kind of put the spotlight on their village, and also to say, you know, we'll bring in something of really good quality. The launch, which happened on the 27th of November, the mural really went in the day before. I think it was quite a damp day. I think I remember us all standing out there with brollies. But the Lord Lieutenant, Mr. Atkinson, just also so happened to be the last chief executive of Gales. And we took over one of the pubs, and some of the artwork was displayed there, and lots of the different communities were invited in. One of the lovely things about it was that Mr. Gale, who was one of the last surviving family members, was also there and loved the idea of the project.
Well, when they put it up on the wall, we went down to have a look at it, and of course it was a miserable old day as well, you know. And then they invited us in the ship bow to have something to eat, you know, and that was the best part of it.
Thinking back on the project, I think it showed that there was a real appetite for community engagement, artists to go and work, and people really valued that sense of coming together to celebrate something. People, the community who chose it and voted, wanted and were attracted by the fact that it had people in it. It opens up that facade because of the trompe l'oeil effect and because it's got a person in the foreground, that there is life behind, that once existed behind it, that this place was peopled. It has that kind of remnant and the echo of a past. Life is going to change, buildings will be changed, buildings will be pulled down, other things go up in their place, but you can somehow keep a remnant of that memory there and celebrate the life of a place. It's a living history, because now that building has got families in and who are living their life and their local people contributing to Horndean, but they can now connected perhaps a little bit more to the past of that building, which I think is rather special.
There'll be people that live in Horndean that perhaps are of an age where the association of the brewery is being there is very strong. And, I go up there now and it's kind of sad that you kind of look and go, I wonder how busy the bakery is. I wonder how, the post office isn't there anymore. And then you kind of move on from there and the Ship and Bell, there used to be a door straight through from the Ship and Bell into the brewery. And there'd be punters there that basically came in because, it was, they're next to the brewery. It means something. And, it's not, it's not really there in the same way. It's quite sad. And I suspect there'll be a sort of point in, 15, 20 years time when folk will go, oh, that big tall bit, what is that about? And, well, maybe beyond that, maybe 50 years time when they go, oh, that was a brewery.
The legacy of Gale's continues in a number of different ways. HSB and some of the other Gale's beer brands are available through Fuller's and can be bought in many of their pubs. Within Horndean, the tower still stands as a monument to the success Gale's had throughout the years and the hard work and dedication of their employees. The new mural will also continue to remind local people of the long brewing history of the village. Lastly, in Basingstoke, at the Milestones Living Museum, there is a large collection of Gale's items from the brewery that can be viewed. Within the museum is a large scaled down brick recreation of the iconic tower. And even a working pub. Within this part of the museum, you can see the Victorian steam pump, a huge collection of bottles, signs, and much, much more. A pride of place at the entrance of the museum is the much-loved 1920s Gale's van.
When we wanted something to advertise the firm, we see it advertised in a motorcycle magazine. So they went and had a look at it and brought it up near Preston, and they painted it, hand painted, and we had it for advertising all the brewery and it, and I used to run around with it and go to different shows and advertising all the time, It's 1926 it is, heavy 12.4. We've had lots of pieces added to it, repaired brakes and had a new engine in it and radiator, grill, core, and batteries and different things, and all the front steering was all redone. And it belonged to farmers up in Preston, that's where it come from, A lot of farmers had it. We went to steam rallies and carnivals, and I done some weddings on the back. Yeah, about 4 or 5 weddings we done for Richard Gale's daughter and son, and 1 or 2 landlords, wanted it, and we used to go all over the place with it, weekends, and sometimes they've done 22 shows some years with it, steam rallies and all that, Well, she was good. But the brakes weren't that great, really. You got to think ahead before you get too close to anyone. I was used to them up the backside. Yeah, I like our van, Yeah, well, that's a good idea, isn't it, really? Instead of stuck down around the bottom there, it's up here. The first thing you notice when you come in the door, isn't it? Yeah, well, I think it's a good. Yeah, I like it.